Hi, welcome to the MicroMD ICD10 informational training video. This video will review the requirements for transitioning to ICD10 as they relate to the MicroMD Practice Management Software. The first thing you need to know about transitioning to MicroMD ICD10 is that you'll have to be on the proper version. To see if you're on that version, go to your Help menu and click About. You want to make sure that your client version has a 10.5 to continue with the necessary process. Even though you can see my demo version is 10.0, I'll proceed with the training because I'm not actually creating real claims using this version. You'll want to make sure that you are on a 10.5 version in order to have proper mapping and ICD10 functionality. If you don't have 10.5 installed currently, just contact our office and we can get that scheduled for you. One of the most time-consuming processes as you transition will be mapping your ICD9 to your ICD10 codes. You'll notice in the new version you have two columns where prior versions only had the ICD9 column. We now have ICD9 and ICD10. MicroMD software is able to dual code, which allows you to send claims out to carriers in ICD9 or in ICD10. As you can see here, when I'm looking at the very first ICD9 code of 005.9, it already has a mapped solution for ICD10, which indicates A05.9. In the MicroMD software, if there is a one-to-one exact match, the mapping for those codes will be automatically performed. As I drill in, you'll notice that they have a single option under the ICD10 billing code. For that reason, MicroMD was able to automatically map that code for you. However, when we look at one where we have an ICD9 code but we have a blank ICD10 field, that indicates that there are multiple ICD10 possibilities for the single ICD9 code. In cases like this, you will need to come in and manually map each ICD10 code for this particular ICD9 code. You do that by unchecking the box that indicates multiple ICD10 codes. Then, if you click the drop-down arrow, you'll see how many possible ICD10 codes exist for the single ICD9 034.0. To properly map this code, you will want to first click on your Save menu, and that will allow you to map 034 to a blank ICD10. So I click Save. That creates my first entry in my table, just as you see here in the existing table. Next, I want to hit my Duplicate button, and then I want to choose the code that I want to associate. As soon as I choose that code, the system is asking me if I want to use the ICD10 description. Your answer should be yes. Once I click yes, I have created a second row. I now have my 034.0 with a blank, and I also have a 034.0 with the J03.01 with the separate descriptions. Because I know there are two more, I have to hit Duplicate again. And this time I want to choose the next one in the row. And you would continue that mapping process until you've used all of the codes in your drop-down list. Once you've completed, you can simply exit, say yes, and you'll note that you have multiple 034 entries now, where before we only had the one. 034 is now completely mapped, and you would move on to your next code that needed to be mapped. Keep in mind that you should only map ICD9 codes that your practice has used. if you currently use our EDI clearinghouse, we can provide you with a list of the possible ICD-10 codes you will need using your historical data in the system. Additionally, you can use a MicroMD report by going to Reports, Management, and Diagnosis History. To determine for a service date range, I would recommend going with at least a 2-year date range. For the purpose of demonstration, I'm only going to utilize a 3-month date range. And what will happen is you will get a report, leave it on the summary format. Let me go back to the option screen. Leave the summary format and just simply insert a service date range. That'll run the report showing you the diagnosis codes used in that service date period. Now notice that the percentages are not organized or not in order. I want to sort them based on my most frequently used. So when I click on this column header a single time, it gives me my least used. And when I click it a second time, it reverse sorts, giving me my most frequently used. And here's where I would start mapping. Start mapping with this code. So I can go ahead and go to Maintenance and Diagnosis and open that right up on top of this table and begin mapping. Pull up, making sure that my based on search is set to my ICD-9 code, because that's what this report is pulling. So I'm looking for my ICD-9 code 366.16. I want to see if this is mapped. You can see that there are multiple entries for this code. If you wanted to confirm that all codes were mapped, you could simply open that up and verify the two. That code is mapped, so I'm going to move to my next one. Now we know this one is mapped because we just did that just a minute ago. But I'm going to search it, and again open that blank entry one, and you'll see which codes should be mapped. In this case, I see a 0, 1, 0, 0, and a 0, and I have all of those, so I know that one is done. On your system, when you first come in, your codes are not going to be mapped. Mine in my demo are mapped because I've used them for training and testing. And here we have a single entry, so that one was auto mapped for us. So the list of my frequently used codes is already mapped, so I'm done. Your instance won't be quite as clean. In fact, if I come in here and I run a more realistic report, and for demo purposes, I'm just going to run it wide open, your list is going to look a little more like this, where you have multiple codes. And you're going to have to go through this list, sort it like we did before, and you're going to have to look up each of those codes. And determine if they need to be mapped. In this case, I have some mapping to do. And then I would continue down this list through all 19 pages or the entire list of codes, because they all do need to be mapped. And in this case, on my demo, I have 467 codes that could translate to about 20 to 30,000 ICD-10 codes. So what I've just demonstrated to you, and I'm going to go ahead and do one more. Let's do this V2002. So I would go in my diagnosis list, making sure my based on search is set to ICD-9. I would enter my ICD-9 code that I needed to map, and I would drill into it. Where I see the ICD-9 checkbox, I want to go ahead and I want to uncheck that, but the first thing I have to do is hit save, so I save a blank row. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to hit duplicate, and I'm going to choose my very first ICD-10. I'm going to always say yes to saving the description, otherwise you won't be able to discern the different ICD-10 code descriptions. You must say yes. Once you say yes, hit duplicate, choose the next one in the drop down list, say yes, choose duplicate again, choose the next one in the drop down list, and it's keeping my spot by highlighting the last one. Say yes and duplicate again and choose the final one. The only instance that you wouldn't use all of the available ICD-10 codes is if you come across an ICD-10 that you know you will never use. You don't have to map it. But if you don't map it, you can't use it. Now that I've mapped all of those, I'm just going to exit that window and it's going to ask me to save. My V20.2 is going to now have multiple entries. It had the 4 ICD-10 variables, and we saved the blank row as well for an ICD-9 only plan. So we're done with that code. We would move on to our next code, which is V65.9 in our list here. I hit search. I see that it's already set up, but just to show you, it only has that single entry, and that's why it's already set up. So I can move on to the next one. You can just look at it here. If it's showing mapped, you should be good and be able to move on to the next one. You don't have to drill into it. Here's another one that's already, it's a 1-to-1 match. So I don't have anything to do on that. And I would continue keying these codes until I get to one that has the blank ICD-10, which is going to require me to map it. When I uncheck, I can see there are multiple entries. I want to first create my blank row, so I'm going to hit save. Next, hit duplicate. Hit the drop down, choose the first one in the list. Say yes to saving the description. Duplicate, hit the drop down, select the next one, yes to save the description. Duplicate, hit the drop down. Remember, the blue line is saving my place for the last one that I did, so I need to choose the next one in line. Yes, duplicate, drop down, choose the next one in line. Yes, and I know I'm completed because I just selected the last one, so I'm going to exit and I'm going to say yes to save. This process is the same throughout all codes. I would continue down my list here, keying in my next code and determining whether I needed to map. I do, so I'm going to uncheck. I'm going to hit save to create my blank row. I'm going to next hit my duplicate, and I'm going to choose the first one in my drop down list. Yes to save my description. Duplicate, drop down, select the next one in line. Yes to save my description. Because that was the last code, I'm going to go ahead and exit and tell the system, yes, please save that. I'm going to move on my list to my next code, and you would proceed until you've completed all codes in the system the exact same way, making sure to map every ICD-10 that you might potentially use. If in doubt, go ahead and map it, because you will need it mapped in order to pull it up and use it. So once your MicroMD version has been updated to 10.5 and all your mapping is complete, you can now perform testing with payers and other vendors if the need arises. In order to do that, you're going to have to go to your setup menu and access the System Preferences menu and then the System Preferences tab. There you'll see that we have an ICD-10 changeover date, which is currently set to October 1st, 2015, the go-live date for ICD-10. MicroMD will not send out or generate an ICD-10 code until that date. So, if I wanted to create test claims today, I would need to hit my drop-down menu and choose today's date in order to generate a batch. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, any claims generated on or after 7/25/2015 will go out as ICD-10. I'm going to go ahead and save that so that I can demonstrate to you performing a test. One thing to keep in mind is that once you change this date, you do not want anybody in the practice creating claims and sending claims, because they're going to incorporate the ICD-10 code rather than the ICD-9 code. So, schedule your testing period and make sure that anybody that would generate charges or batch out claims understands that they cannot perform those functions. You can still process payments and work existing claims, but you don't want to generate new or send them out the door. Now that we have our system settings set to ICD10 for testing purposes, and we've notified all staff, we can go to Charges and Payments and key in charges just like we normally do. You will see a slight difference when you add a charge. For example, in this patient, we have a case set up under the patient's demographics, and that's pulling a couple of related diagnosis codes. But notice that it's keying in the ICD-10 equivalent rather than the ICD-9. Now, there are some instances where you will see an X, and that just indicates that you have an ICD-9 code that does not translate into ICD-10, and that would just need to be removed. Additionally, if I don't know my ICD-10 code, I can key in my ICD-9. If you remember, pharyngitis is one that we did when I was demonstrating the mapping. And now I have multiple choices because we mapped all the ICD-10 possible. So here it's bringing up the diagnosis search or reference window that will allow me to select the appropriate ICD-10 code based on the ICD-9 that I keyed in. If you are adding an ICD-10 code, you will not get that reference window. So you're only going to see that reference window when you keyed it in as an ICD-9 and the system needs you to translate it to an ICD-10 code or associate it with an ICD-10. But because I'm giving it the ICD-10 here, there's no need to pop up that window, and therefore you'll see that it's bypassed. When I put in my 34.0, I'm going to see that window because the system wants me to associate it either with no ICD-10 or with an ICD-10. And if I choose one that does not have the ICD-10 reference, you'll see that X that we just discussed. That can mean that the code is either not mapped or that there is no ICD-10 equivalent for that code. Once your ICD codes are entered, entering your charge is the same as you always do. Once it's complete, just save it and ready it for processing through your claims clearinghouse. Now that we have a test claim in, let's go ahead, and you can do multiple claims if you want to. The next step would be to process the claim. You'll want to come in and select your clearinghouse like you always do. Yours may default, in my case it did not. But the difference here is I don't want to look for all ready claims. I want to look for my test claims, and so I'm going to key in just those patient accounts that have my test claims. So once you've set up your patient, just hit search, and you're only going to pull in claims that are ready for that patient. In my case, I only want sequence 15 because I know that's the one that I set up using my ICD-10 for testing. So I'm going to select the exact claim. Now you could be using a test patient or whatever it is that you want. Just make sure to note the patient account number and the sequence number so that you can pull only those accounts into and select only those sequences needed for testing your claim batch. Once I run my summary report, you may see some warnings, etc., just like you normally do. You may see some new ones based on the transition. But notice my ICD codes are my ICD-10, and that's what's going to go out to your clearinghouse. So again, the same process, and I'm going to just call this testing. I'm doing an electronic print. I'm not printing to paper, but yours would print just like it normally does. And then I'm going to batch that claim. My batch file is generated, and I will upload that batch file however your vendor is asking you to upload the test ICD-10 test batch file. If you're doing it to a clearinghouse, it may be the standard way, or they may have a special portal. So you'll want to make sure whoever you're testing ICD-10 with instructs you on how to get that batch file to them. If you need assistance finding your batch file, we can assist you. And I'm going to go ahead and open up ours here, and we're going to look for that J02 code, and there it is. So you can see my diagnosis codes are pushing out in this ICD-10 format. There's the 3 diagnosis codes that we sent out. If you need to find your file, you need to browse the network for wherever your system is sending that file and whatever the name is. We can certainly assist you by calling our support office, but you can also go, when you have your selected clearinghouse, into your EB setup, click Hyper Access, and that's going to tell you where that file is. So you would copy this label here and then go to your Start menu and just paste that in there. So what I did was I selected this and I hit Control and C on my keyboard. I then came to my Start menu, clicked in the little search area, and I hit Control V as in Victor for pasting that. You could also just type it in there, have your EB setup window open, and type C:, but of course you have to be exact, and open that and look for that file that you normally upload to your clearinghouse. The name will be the same. It helps also to use Date Modified to pull your date in. Once you're done, just cancel out of that. And that's all there really is to producing your test. So you go under Setup, System Preferences, and the System Preference tab, and you set your ICD10 changeover date. Normally, just use this Today link and click today's date, and you have to save that. You are then going to produce your test claims and batch them out just as you normally do, remembering to select only your test patients and the specific sequences that you're using for testing. After that, you'll upload your file to your testing vendor, and you'll want to do that before anybody else proceeds with any kind of batch files or batching of claims, because they will overwrite your test file. So you'll want to get that uploaded before you proceed with batching any other claims. After you successfully upload your test batch file to your vendor, you'll want to make sure to come back in under Setup, System Preferences, and the System Preference tab, and make sure to set this date back to October 1st. You can either use the calendar and go out in the months, or you can key that date in. But you want to make sure you set it back to October 1st so that your claims are not going out incorrectly. That's extremely important. And that would complete your testing process for sending ICD-10 claims out to a clearinghouse or vendor for testing purposes in advance of October 1st. If you have a payer in MicroMD that needs to send only ICD-9 claims, you'll need to go to Maintenance and Plan, pull up that plan, drill into the plan detail screen, and go to the ID tab. In the ID tab to the far right, you'll see Use ICD-9 on Claims. You'll want to check that box, and then you'll want to click Save. That plan now will only send ICD-9 claims. To determine if a payer is ICD-9 only, you will need to call that payer directly and confirm that status. Currently, there are no available listings that distinguish an ICD-10 payer from an ICD-9 payer. Some of the known exclusions for ICD-10 include workers' compensation and government plans. So you'll need to contact those payers directly and determine whether or not they need to be configured as an ICD-9 only payer. Finally, as we go into the patient accounts, when you update to ICD-10 and you've mapped your codes, you'll notice some changes. As I go into plan visits here, notice I have an ICD-9 code. Once I change over to ICD-10, it will update this field as long as those codes are mapped. Just as in your claims, if you see an X, it just indicates you have an unmapped code. Let me go ahead and change our system back for a moment to make it ICD-10 currently, so that I can show you the difference. We'll go back into the same patient account, and let's open their plan visits. Notice that I have an X That's because my 477.9 ICD-9 code is not mapped. So if I were to go under maintenance and diagnosis and pull up my 477.9, I can see that it's not mapped. When I come in and uncheck, I can go ahead and map it at this point. Once it's mapped and I come back in, you'll be able to see that it updates to the ICD-10 code. The same would apply to our Cases tab if you're utilizing that and inserting ICD-9 codes. If you have any questions or need assistance with ICD-9, ICD-10 mapping, please contact Medical Software Associates Support and we will be glad to assist you. Thank you and have a great day.